wave of water that came through the village, killing 35 people. Weather manipulation. It's been going on that long. They have strontium, they have barium, it's acidifying water, it's acidifying the land. The ability to generate precipitation, fog storms on Earth, to modify space weather, and the production of artificial weather, all are part of an integrated set of military technology.
They're spraying chemicals in nanoparticle form. The government is using HAARP to be starting a storm. The water shortage is a topic they're complaining about, but they don't even want to stop it. They're creating the drought. Planes now make clouds when they spray out shit. You can see it cause it happens every day now, kid. You can read the patents and see what they say about this. They make towns sick, it ain't safe to stay around this.
In this day and age of misdirection, manipulation, and misinformation, a truther must be careful to not too easily fall victim to what's referred to as a limited hangout, or PSYOP, or an intentional psychological operation designed to lead the believer in a direction that discredits the other beliefs the truther may hold, that are in fact true, and or to simply lead them astray. This has been documented in U.S. history, and is quite literally taken straight from Sun Tzu's Art of War, which is recognized as one of the foremost references in the psychology of warfare. Yet in this same light, one must be careful as well to not discount any line of thinking offhand for fear of falling victim to the rampant misdirection actively propagated by the establishment. So when discussing a theory as jarring as flat Earth, as we are today, you must approach it as we have advised you in the past to approach all topics, with an open mind and simultaneously a healthy skepticism. Yet if you choose to start this discussion already discounting the possibility of its validity, you will most likely fall safely back on the science that demonstrates its falsity, despite the fact that it is the very same science used to manipulate the populace on other beliefs that have since been proven valid, flying in the face of the so-called scientific proof. Now this does not mean that science is not to be trusted, but rather to demonstrate that scientists are humans like anyone else, and susceptible to infiltration and manipulation by way of financial incentive or boost to reputation and social status. A recent revelation from the editor-in-chief of The Lancet, the world's leading scientific journal, revealed that around half of all scientific studies being produced today are in fact false, revealing that much of what we see today is essentially paid for by outside interests. Once you have given the information its due consideration with an open mind, you then consider all you have seen and all you know about possible governmental manipulation of studies and public narratives, alongside the original scientific insights, and formulate your own personal belief. Now, in believing in any so-called conspiracy theory, one must accept that there is a certain level of collusion or manipulation by those in official positions. So to believe in flat Earth, you have to first make peace with the fact that the theory essentially, indirectly, calls any and all governmental and independent bodies that work with or are related to space exploration by telescope or actual travel, extreme land exploration, geolocation services, map and globe production, any number of associated fields are all, to one degree or another, involved or at the very least unknowingly producing false information. And that all astronomers, astrophysicists, rocket scientists, and the like are out of the job or have been lying at the very least. As extreme as this may sound, such long-term and extravagant efforts have taken place in this nation's history. So today we are diving further in, and we will make our conclusions together. So today we are indeed discussing Flat Earth Theory. We are your hosts, Ryan Christian and DJ Anon.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm pretty excited about today's show.
Yeah, it's been an interesting one. This last week's research has definitely... It's been an interesting kind of experiment, right? Because I feel like we've discussed topics up until this point that, for the most part, I could say that I wholeheartedly believe in. Mm-hmm. Right? So to tackle this one, I had to really embrace the same things that I preach to everybody every week.
To get out of your comfort bubble?
Just to embrace everything with an extremely open mind.
Yeah.
But, simultaneously with healthy skepticism. Now, I mean, they may seem like mutually exclusive to some degree, but they're not when you really think about it. Mm-hmm. You really have to be open to every possibility or you're going to shut everything down.
Yeah. It's kind of funny you mentioned earlier in that intro about how many people would be out of a job, and I was thinking about that. Imagine it. Philosophers, scientists, theologians, even
Right.
the astronomy, there could be such devastation to an economy.
The reaches of this, like if this were to be true, it's extreme. Like when you really break down the levels that we can go to, that would essentially mean that the moon landing was fake. It would essentially mean that, anything involving space exploration or like you said, the philosophy behind it, the thinking, it's all either fake or they're just not good at their jobs.
Yeah.
There's no other way to look at it if you believe this is true.
Well, especially if something is based off an idea without their own research.
Right. Exactly.
Like we're all, I'm sure you've come across this, everybody's talking about how one of the first things you see when you go into your first classroom is a globe.
Right.
I mean, that's what you're taught early on, and there's no reason to question it.
And, and even in like the scientific world, there are certain things that are considered to be that kind of information where you don't question it. It's a given.
Yeah.
Like you just, because this is this can be that, and you just move on from that point as if that's a given.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether you've researched or not.
That's one of those because we say so's.
Exactly. And it's, and again, it is hard to think of it not being true because we've been, given all this information over and over. Like you said, first you see the globe and it's round and you talk about where the locations are and then you learn about the solar system and it just goes on from there. And it's just reinforcing one after the other.
Yeah.
And that's if this is actually correct. Now I want to tell a quick joke that I saw that really highlights the idea of what we're talking about being just people that are very quick to dismiss something like this without giving it its due research by whoever would be looking at this. Now it's a funny joke, and you'll get the point when I'm done. So a Mayan elder wearing a traditional Mayan garb walks into a bar. He sits down and strikes up a conversation with the bartender. The bartender says, "Hey, you don't look like you're from around here. Where are you from?" The Mayan elder says, "Earth." The bartender says, "What do your people believe in?" The Mayan elder replies, "Well, our people believe that the earth rests on a giant crocodile sitting in a lake of water lilies." The bartender says, "Wow, that's fascinating. Tell me more." An Anishinaabe elder wearing a traditional feather headdress walks into the bar. The bartender says, "Hey, partner, where are you from?" And the Anishinaabe elder says, "Around these parts." The bartender then says, "The last guy I had in here believed the earth was on a crocodile. What do your people believe?" Then the Anishinaabe elder replies, "Well, our people believe that the earth sits on the back of a giant turtle, resting in a great ocean." The bartender says, "Wow, that's incredible. Tell me more." A gentleman sitting at the bar then walks up to the bartender and says, "Hey, I heard you talking with those native wisdom keepers about the earth. Do you know what I believe?" The bartender says, "No, what?" The bar patron says that the earth is flat. The bartender says, "The earth is a ball, you idiot. Get the fuck out of my bar." I thought that was hilarious personally, because what that's really showing you is that, in a joke fashion, but the idea is that, he's really interested in any kind of outside thought or, any different perspective until it talks about flat earth. And then it's just a no-go zone.
Yeah.
And that in itself is kind of funny. It highlights the idea that we are quick to dismiss things that we are essentially conditioned to dismiss.
Anything that shakes the foundation.
Right? So the interesting idea when you really dive into the flat earth, and the things that I've seen over the last week of research here, is essentially that like I said, there's a lot of far-reaching implications of this if it were to be true or not to be true. And so I would start with the very first one, right, which is, I think this would be a kind of defining concept of a believer in the flat earth theory, and I would even bet that they are divided amongst themselves with this topic.
Oh, yeah.
Dome or no dome.
Yep.
What would you think?
Me personally, if it's a dome or not?
Mm-hmm. Like, let's say, going on the assumption that this is true and that we're believing it, what would make more sense logically?
I think, honestly, it could go either way. If we were on a sphere and there was, space beyond the atmosphere, why couldn't there just be a flat plane with space beyond the atmosphere?
Mm-hmm.
So that could be one thing. But then you have to think about a border. It's got to stop somewhere. So I don't know if you've came across the UN flag picture. That kind of describes what a lot of flat earthers believe is what it looks like. So you got Antarctica at the perimeter around the edge. And that's actually why they say that almost all nations have a signed treaty for no exploration and no admittance to Antarctica up to a certain point.
That's a very important part of that too. So essentially the flat, if you look at the UN map or flag, It's essentially an image of the Earth from like a flat perspective, as if you were looking at the North Pole directly.
Right.
And the idea is that it's at least put flat. And this isn't funny enough. This is an actual map. A map that was
Yeah.
produced by the the people that make all the maps made this version of the map. And it's actually what they use for the UN flag, and then it's also like a legitimate version. And now the flat Earth people pick this map up, and they're essentially don't associate with each other, but it's a legitimate map.
Yeah.
And it shows that the outer ring of the flat world would be like essentially an ice wall, which would be Antarctica. Hypothetically, that would be the outside ring, and everything else in the inside is on a flat plane. And it gets into some really interesting ideas when you start breaking it down, of like flights and different ways that they manipulate the data so really like you're flying from South America to Australia, it's going to show you a certain path on your flight, on your ticket, but it's not really what you're taking if this were to be correct, right? And it, that's why if you look if you look up the GPS of any planes or anything like that flying, like there's actually a bunch of sites you can look up where you can literally track the GPS of every plane in flight.
Oh yeah, none of them is trackable
over the southern hemisphere. Yeah, any plane that flies over the water will literally disappear on the GPS map. And obviously, you could explain this away by any number of offhanded probably excuses they could throw out.
But every single flight.
Yes, and it's very interesting. That it just happens to disappear and then it reappears over its location.
Yeah.
And they would say that this is because they can't fly right there. There's nowhere for it to fly.
Right.
And so that's an interesting idea.
So if you can imagine looking down on the globe, down at the North Pole, and you literally just flatten it out, and so the South Pole,
really doesn't
peels
exist.
up, so the South Pole then becomes the perimeter, and then you take into that flight that you just talked about from South America to Australia. There's a reason why 98% of those flights go to like Southern California first, and then Australia. And so if you were to take a straight shot, that actually is a straight shot on a flat Earth map.
Right. And they just mix it up with layovers and
we gotta go pick up
non-stops. Yeah, exactly. I mean, to go back and answer my own question about that, so I would say, as far as the dome goes, I would honestly say that it would be the most logical, assuming that this is true, and based on the the air flights and all the things we were just talking about, I would think that the only way that this would be possible is if there was a dome. I mean, that would be my opinion, only because when you really think about it, like to kind of note on your point that it's like a mathematical thing as far as any object that is larger than, I think, what was it? It's supposed to be a couple hundred miles. Like matter that is more than a couple hundred miles tends to coalesce into a sphere, right? And so that's seen in the world as in science, and essentially that the same thing like you see water, it spheres into a droplet, right? That's what people would believe that would happen to any larger than a few hundred miles like structure out in space, that it would kind of just fall into a sphere shape. And that, again, I love this. Going back to the beginning, where we're talking about the Lancet and scientific information, the problem with this kind of idea is that you could shrug away anything by saying, oh, well, they can manipulate that.
Yeah.
And that's what becomes really hard, is that you really, I have a friend of mine that is an avid follower of the site and our show, and he's he's probably listening right now, and he always says that, it's common for truthers or anything, in the alternative movement to use a study to prove something that they believe, and then at the same time use the fact that a study can be manipulated to disprove something on the other side.
Right.
And he's completely right. And so it becomes very hard to know when to believe something, when not to believe something. But so at the end of the day, you kind of have to, like we always said, you have to be open to it being fake, at the same time believing it without, when you first go into it.
Yeah. Another thing too, like at least most of us, we all have logic. And when you take into consideration who is telling us certain things, for example, in this particular case, flat Earth theory, NASA, we've already proven they've lied. The government, proven they lied. There's plenty of reasons to believe the education system is failing for a reason, to make us stupid. So they're lying. I mean, the K through 12 process is just programming. We all know that. So the last thing that's left is personal experience and research. And the best thing that we have is our senses. So like I was talking about the horizon thing, no matter where you go, it's always at eye level.
Right.
So if you were on a ball and you were to raise up an elevation, it should get not only farther away from you, but more severe of a curve. but it doesn't unless you look through a GoPro or a fisheye lens.
That's what they say, yeah. So it shows the curvature of the Earth, and they say, well, essentially, NASA will say that no one has gotten high enough to be able to see it, right? That's their explanation of that. And
Which totally contradicts other scientific studies, such as, waterways and ships out in the horizon, how it dips down because it's gone beyond the horizon point, right?
Right.
But you take any binocular, telescope, whatever, and fix it on that point, it pops right back up.
Right.
So,
well, I mean, they say that essentially, it's people all over the world record seeing, ships or things like you were talking about that they're supposedly over the edge of the Earth, over the curvature. Mm-hmm. But according to, basic mathematics of a sphere, essentially the equator is roughly 25,000 miles or so. So it should not be visible after a certain point. However, people have recorded it all over 30 miles, 60 miles off the coast with a high, def lens, being able to zoom in and still see it. Yeah. So realistically, that should be mathematically possible. Mm-hmm. But my first thought, trying to disprove in a way, would be that maybe there's some kind of a, refraction of light that allows it to be seen a weird way. Kind of like how people are, recording seeing these floating cities in China and Japan. You heard about that?
Yeah.
And so, that would be if I was forced to try and debunk it, that would be my logic. But to me, that seems like kind of a far-fetched concept, especially if, it's kind of recorded being seen all the time from different people.
Well, a good example is there was a article or a news story that came out last year, I think it was, about the Chicago skyline. Mm-hmm. How they said it was a super mirage, right? But they only reported on it once. However, on a clear day, you can see it every single day.
Interesting.
Not only that, but there's this arc down in Malibu, off the coast of Malibu. It is, I think it's 60 miles or something, 20 miles. It's way beyond the mathematical curvature formula, which is like 8 inches per mile squared. So every mile, your horizon should drop down 8 inches, right, and then squared after that.
But it doesn't.
But yeah, this arc on a clear day, everybody, like a common term, I guess, is, the arc's out today. Because you could see it. And this thing is only like 10, 20 feet off the ground.
Interesting.
So that's another thing.
Right. And just, again, like we always say, you continue to line these things up. Go throughout the show. Just follow with us and you line these up. And it does kind of makes a pretty clear point on this. One thing to the point we were saying earlier, there was one company called DogCam that actually sent their camera up into the higher levels of the atmosphere to it was for like a publicity stunt. They wanted to show their camera and show how it's like a GoPro kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And what they inadvertently caught, and this is one of the things that people debunk the whole flat Earth theory, jump on, and it is kind of hard to believe, is that they believe that the sun is actually much closer and smaller than astronomy and science will tell us.
Right.
And what this camera, it's actually on a video called Flat Earth, the Ultimate Litmus Test. Mm-hmm. And it shows this camera up high enough where you can literally see like a hot spot from the sun on the clouds.
Right.
And the point they're making in this is that if the sun was actually as far away as it's supposed to be, that would be impossible.
Right.
And that it's actually much closer, and that's why you can see the hot spot. Interesting theory. I mean, it's not. See, the thing with a lot of these theories is that there's really no way to disprove this now. One, you got, mainstream science won't even touch it anyway.
Yeah.
And two, most of these people that are researching these things are just average people that don't have the means to research it. But it's interesting.
There's another guy, Mr. Thrive and Survive. He does a lot of really good self-paid experiments. Like he's sent up weather balloons 70, 80, 90, 100,000 feet. And total flat horizon, no fisheye lens, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And he just released a video, it was today, I think it was, talking about the position of the sun and how it gets bigger and farther away depending on the time of day. Mm-hmm. Well, does that mean the Earth gets closer to the sun every single day at that same time? I mean, we know, from the heliocentric point of view that, winter time, it's supposed to be so many millions of miles away. And then I think the difference is 80 million miles up to 96 million miles.
Yeah,
from
exactly.
Closest to furthest point. However, that's not enough distance. It would have to be 96 million miles that we would see the sun at its smallest point. Mm-hmm. And then at its biggest point, which is over half the diameter that we can see visually, it would have to be down to like 40-something million miles away. But that's not what they say.
Yes, you do. You stumble across a lot of these like mathematical inconsistencies,
Mm-hmm.
which to me, those are the ones that really, really kind of make me open my eyes to it.
Yeah.
It's like there's the one about traveling around the Earth as far like mathematically, as far as like the time frame it would cost, to act, or like the same thing we were just talking about, the horizon. I mean, these are all mathematically, researched as far as like the time it would take or the distance it would take to cross around the curvature of the Earth. And this is based on mathematics of a sphere being like give or take kind of a perfect ball, and so it's very interesting. And before we get too far off on each one of these different points and counterpoints, I want to go into a little bit just like the background of what this is and kind of what they believe. Really, a lot of this stems from what's called the firmament. And I'm sure you've seen that in your research, and it's essentially
separates the waters from above and below.
It's essentially the religious connotation behind it, and what's weird is you go back to the Bible, the Quran, the five big religions, and their writings. They all talk about
flat Earth.
Exactly. They all talk about flat Earth, and they call it the firmament. Now, it shows like the layers of the world, and obviously this could be due to their beliefs in the world at that point in time anyway.
Right.
And it could have just crossed over. But a lot of people tie it in with the fact that some of these religions, they claim would have been contacted, let's say, by some kind of higher power or whatever it would be. And that's how they got this information way before we were even able to understand what the Earth was like. And that's kind of interesting. And so what they would really believe, and this isn't all of them, again, there's so many, just like any theory like this, there's so many different groups and layers, and they have their own inner working beliefs, within it. Such as Hollow Earth and these different things that it really, dives into.
Oh, I don't know about that whole Hollow Earth shit.
Right. Well, it's just as off the path as this one, really. But what they would believe for the kind of broaden most of them would be that it's like a religious thing, where the idea would be that we are being watched or kind of graded by some kind of a higher power, a god or whatever you want to call it, and that we are being kept from reaching the next state of our evolution as humanity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, it's interesting to think about, and the big things that they ask really in this logic is, are we being hidden? Is wealth being hidden? And are they hiding God?
Yes,
right?
Yes, and yes.
Right. Well, and it's interesting now to touch on the wealth aspect. Now, this goes all the way back, and this is to the history as well of Byrd. It was the researcher.
Oh, Admiral Byrd?
Admiral Byrd, exactly.
Yeah.
And he was researching Antarctica. And, what they think is that he essentially found the edge of the world. He found the wall. It's like an ice wall, supposedly, that surrounds the edge. And that in finding, well, before they went and researched, the reason that they went to research in the first place in that area, and he's actually on an old video in like 1957, I think, or something like that.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Where he talks with these broadcasters about why they were going to research it, that it was ripe with coal and all these resources and oil and
minerals,
and uranium was the big one, right? And so that it's this resource-rich land, just full of, and it's untouched, and no one's been there, right? So they go out and venture out into the unknown. They come back, and within a few years, it was 1961, I believe, they signed a treaty amongst all main powers in the world that no one's allowed to go on Antarctica.
Yeah, at that time it was 52 nations.
I mean, think about how weird that is. That especially in a point where resources are a huge driving factor for why we do anything in this world, and that everybody. I mean, when's the last time every country in the world agreed on anything, right? So now we got pretty much every leading nation in the world deciding that no one can go there, and it's never touched again.
Yeah, and then shortly after his quote unquote discovery, was it Russia, the United States, and I think that was probably it. Launched hundreds of nukes. Straight up.
That's interesting.
I can't remember there's what is that operation? I can't remember the name of it was, but it was a joint effort between the two nations.
And what was their desire? What were they trying to accomplish?
A lot of people think it's to crack the dome or reach the dome.
That's what a lot of people will say about Admiral Byrd and everything back then too, is that this was essentially when the power, the establishment, the actual elite, discovered that there was the wall.
Yeah,
like that was the point that up until this point they hadn't really made that association, and then that's why we had switched over to the idea of the having a sphere globe versus the flat Earth, and we moved and then once they realized that it was actually flat, They just couldn't go back on it.
Yeah.
I mean, and people will ask, why wouldn't they do that? I mean, there's a lot of reasons, and we kind of touched on it with the job aspect. You know, just think about what that would do. You know, the implications are far-reaching when you really break open this one.
Well, especially nowadays, how hard science... I mean, back in the day, if you were studying science, you were a heretic.
Right.
You know, Galileo, look at him.
Right.
Copernicus. Nowadays, science is being pushed so hard. A one-world religion is being pushed so hard. I mean, a flat Earth proves a creator, flat out.
Right. It really
Flat
does.
out.
Yeah, right. No pun intended. Or maybe.
Yeah. I don't know.
But you're right, though. It really does. At the end of the day, it pretty much unequivocally proves that there's somebody controlling this. Because it had to be built, right? It could, you know, it had to be create the dome or create whatever we're living on.
Yeah.
So, you know, it really breaks open all these topics on you know, the space travel and all that, as far as like what, you know, whether they revolve around us. You know, that's the idea, is that essentially their belief would be that everything either revolves around us or it's fake.
Yeah.
I've seen both in the research, that either people say it's being projected onto the dome, or that it's...
Oh, yeah, I've
or
seen
that
that one.
we're in the center. Really, that every part of the atmosphere works the same way we believe it does, except the fact that everything revolves around us. Whereas, you know, essentially the belief would be that everything revolves around the sun, while that sun is simultaneously revolving around the Earth.
Well, okay, I just thought of something. So we got the Polaris, North Star, right?
Mm-hmm.
How come that does not vary when we're on the other side of the sun?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's, you know, there's a lot of those kind of, you know, interesting tidbits that just kind of make you go, okay, you know, like I see where they're coming from. Like, you know, you don't just immediately believe this, but that, you know, we could, you know, we'll go throughout the show. We're going to list off a lot of those, and
Yeah,
it's going to pique your interest to some degree.
Hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, you know, when you're going into more on the background and everything, so once they found that, once they labeled it off limits, and nobody else goes there, right? So now that is very odd right off the bat to me. That seems like a pretty weird scenario. Mm-hmm. And then you break into the idea that you have, I mean, think about how many people would be wanting to go there, would be wanting to try and get these resources, right? But not a single person in history since 1961 has even petitioned for the option.
Yeah.
Not an oil company, not any one of these people. Again, that's just, I mean, that's unheard of. That just does not happen.
The people that have gone down, besides the scientific expeditions, right? They're on the outskirts of the island, supposed island. You know, a lot of explorers have died or have been killed on the way or on the way back, type of thing. I think even the South Pole, it's just a ceremonial South Pole. It's nowhere near. It's like 300 miles off.
Right. And I mean, the other weird thing is that after this expedition in 1961, they just stopped.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, why is, you know, I mean, even Admiral Byrd even said in that interview that he's like, I can guarantee there will be one after another, you know, that we will continue to send expeditions and blah, 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 blah. And he goes on about it because that's what happens in science. No one ever stops after one. They continue to you know, research it further and further to get, you know, that's how science works. It's not just one person found one thing. It's that a team of people found it and they compare their results.
Yeah.
Right. And so they just stopped going. I mean, that seems pretty weird to me. Now, you know, then this crosses over into the same idea we're talking about as land travel, but then in space, right? Mm-hmm. So, by default, if you were to believe this theory, it would make space travel in general a fraud, right? I mean, obviously, to deep space travel. You know, it depends on what you believe the dome would be to a certain level. You know, you'd be able to fly up to a certain degree, but eventually you would stop. So the travel to the moon, let's say, is absolutely fake if you believe this. Mm-hmm. And some information to back that kind of line of thought up is, now some people made some very interesting thought, you know, they really dive into this information. They find some interesting correlations, where one would be that, how many movies have you seen about space travel, right? Science fiction, all of them, right? They're all based on future or, you know,
hundreds.
Exactly.
But how many about, you know, like a moon landing, like a physical, actual shot of moon landings,
right? And so really, as far as I can tell,
if you say Apollo 13, go rewatch it.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Fucking
so there's no movie that's been done where they actually, and you know, the way that you need to say it to make sure people understand it, there's no movie that's supposedly based on true events,
right,
that take place on the moon, on the moon landing or anything about it. That's pretty weird. when you break down the idea that, the whole concept that Hollywood supposedly goes everywhere, right?
Right.
Every outlet they can take.
Well, and of how big of a story that was back in 1969.
Exactly. I mean,
You would have thought something.
yeah, I mean, anything, right? But even taking it today with all the CGI and the possible effects we could do, it's pretty shocking that no one's ever done this, right?
Still, yeah.
60 years, and it's never been done. That would suggest that there's something behind that. Whereas, like, why would they not want to do it? Let's say that'd be the perfect question to pose.
Well, since Hollywood is involved, we all know about the black balls. So, like, any topic that Vax, perfect example. Don't talk about it, so mainstream doesn't touch it.
Exactly. Right, but that the idea that why wouldn't they want them to do it, right? Then it would be really that they could demonstrate that we are able to fake it, which would only poke holes in the possibility that it was faked in the first place.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the logic behind it anyway.
Like you were talking about before, the air bubbles of the astronauts.
Oh yeah, I mean, those are a dime a dozen.
So much.
You can look up these online, people, and there are so many different little clips of. And we've talked about this before. We've touched on the fake moon landing. I mean, and this again is not, my logic just when talking about the moon landing is not essentially that the moon landing didn't happen, but rather that
what we've seen is fake for sure.
Exactly. That, for whatever reason, what we are seeing is not the actual footage, if it indeed exists. And my logic behind that is that they either found something they don't want us to see, they made first contact. I mean, there's any number of reasons. What was that?
They found C-3PO's head.
Yeah, exactly. We talked about it, exactly. But who knows what the reason is, but whatever it is, there's a plethora of things that you can find that are just like eye-opening. The one I always like to point out is the idea that they have crosshairs in all those topographical pictures, and in multiple pictures there are little crosshairs that are kind of cropped out. You can see where they've cropped out a little part of the crosshair.
Oh yeah,
that just doesn't happen. Maybe once, kind of random occurrence. I don't know that much about photography, but at the end of the day, to have 20 of them like that is an obvious sign that something's been cropped out.
Yeah,
and the ones I was just watching last night that were cracking me up is the idea of like the way that like female astronauts and their hair.
Oh yeah,
it looks ridiculous. Go take a moment, you out there listening, and go look at any female in space, like a space station, and the way that their hair looks. It's literally their hair looks like it's permed in like a like a one of those. What is that old show with the? Shoot, I can't remember now.
Bosom Buddies.
No, the lady with like Elektra with the tall hair with the white streak through it. You know what I'm talking about? Elektra, or what? Not Elektra, but the point is that their hair looks like it's stagnant, like sitting in this one location. And you can
Frankenstein's Bride.
Frankenstein, or not Frankenstein, but exactly. That's another one that's just like that, and it looks like it's set like that. And then you actually compare it with images of actual people doing like the airplane flights where they're supposedly dropping in zero gravity to where it shows them flying in the air. And the point is that
vomit comet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in the space stations, there is air within there. They're breathing it, right?
Yep.
So the point is your hair is passing through air. And air is actually a pretty thick gas, when you think about it, a gas. Because when you wave your hand in the air, you can feel it. Think about that. You can actually feel the air on your hand. So realistically, air is a pretty thick substance when you're waving your hand through it. So it's going to make your hair move when you're floating around. And their hair doesn't move at all.
Yeah.
It just kind of shakes as if it's stuck in one place.
Yeah.
And it's such a small thing to note on, but it's just... and it makes it obvious that they're faking this. For what reason? That's the question.
I just had an idea too about the one of the, I can't remember which one it was now, but one of the videos that I came across was talking about rocket launches. How no one has ever actually seen a space shuttle actually go into space because it all goes out beyond horizon because it has to curve or whatever,
Right.
So that's another thing. I was talking about the fuel too, dumping the fuel thing. Then all of a sudden, another good one is how they say the space shuttle is a glider when it comes back, right? Well, there's plenty of live video with audio, and it sounds just like a jet engine, a jet plane.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Wouldn't surprise me. I mean, it's the whole concept of the way we track these things as well, like we were touching on with the airplanes. The one thing that we like that people discuss in this that just gets kind of swept away, like it doesn't really matter, is that we track all these things using GPS, like geolocation. Now, GPS itself was created by the Department of Defense,
right?
And so it wouldn't be that difficult to imagine that they would manipulate this. It's the same way that we can consider that the internet or the dark net or any of these things were all created by the government. So it's very likely that there are measures of control built within them.
Oh yeah,
right. But so going back to the plane topic where they're disappearing on GPS, I mean, that in itself reveals quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But I mean, the noise of the jet, like you're talking about, flying back in, the airplanes, these are all things that are, like we said, have very far-reaching implications. I mean, we are implying with this theory that just about everybody involved in this is either aware of it or just is so bad at their job that they're not realizing that they're seeing something that's fake. I personally find that pretty hard to believe.
It still comes down to compartmentalization, though, because you've got, astronauts. We already know they're sworn in, but like the lower people at Houston Control or whatever, maintenance guys, I doubt any of them have a clue because, they're the ones that saw the globe in first grade and thought nothing of it ever since.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point to talk about.
Also, you have job security, Right. Yeah, it's a government job.
Yeah, definitely.
That's job security. They're not going to risk that.
But what you touched on there is a great point to talk about in anything we talk about, which is compartmentalization, and it's very important. This is a good way, a good model to understand for how these things can kind of propagate throughout the government. Yet not everyone really knows what they're lying about because it's like, so you have a few people at the very top that, let's say, know everything, and then they have another group beneath them where they give very specific instruction on what to do. And those people know more than anybody else beneath them, yet they don't know the key fact that shows them what they're actually doing.
Right.
And the same goes all the way down to the bottom. So all these people are involved, working directly with something that they're faking or lying about, but most of them are actually unaware that they are lying or faking.
Yeah.
But my point is that you got somewhere that's scientific, like some scientific mind, working at NASA. I'd find it really hard to believe that they wouldn't be tipped off by something, any one of these things that we're seeing by looking on a Google search.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so to me, that's one thing that kind of shocks me. But I would say to me that's one thing that makes me feel that this is not true. However, it's with everything that we talk about, people are being deceived. You know what I mean? The people within the government are lying. There's manipulation going on. So the fact that it would simply just be a very massive form of that same manipulation it's just as possible. You know what I mean? So I'm really, again, with these kind of things, I'm always on the fence. But like we always say, keep an open mind as you go down the path.
Yeah.
But, to cross over into the ideas of debunking, which I was kind of just doing, is there's a few of these points that I came across to me that really highlight reasons why this would not be true. Now, one that really stood out to me was that, let's say you're standing on different hemispheres that are supposed to not exist within this theory. And you're standing on, let's say, just the North Pole, South Pole. And you take a picture of the moon. They look different. And this has been verified from people, technology we have today, Skype, whatever, across the world, are, showing that essentially the moon would be inverse or different. So it would look different from different locations, different hemispheres. I don't see how that could happen unless we were on different sides of the planet, right? What do you think on that one?
I heard a few things in rebuttal of that, and that only thing that came across was that the fact it was a projection. The moon was a projection.
And then it's just being controlled via the internet, or like just manipulating the findings?
No. Just visually, the moon is an actual, like if you were to go outside and look at the moon, it's a projection.
Okay.
And that's why, I guess, why sometimes you'll see clouds behind the moon.
But my point is that hold on, that was interesting. I want to go back to that. I haven't heard that before, but how would the moon look different? Like, let's say it's inverse, right? So you're looking at it and and the big crater's on the right when you're in the north hemisphere, and it's on the left when you're on the south hemisphere. If it's a projection, that wouldn't happen. You see what I mean? So realistically, that wouldn't be possible if you were on a flat earth.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's just one thing. And personally, I can't verify that this is true. This is somebody else's point that they threw out, and it makes sense. But they're claiming that they have seen documentation of both other way. Again, that just like we said in the beginning, you could take this as far as you want and be like, well, he could have been paid off by the government and is making You never know, right? But to me, that one did make a lot of sense. So that's one thing that kind of left me going, okay, that's, makes it seem unreal or, fake, essentially.
Yeah.
The other one is what's called the Coriolis effect. Again, this is something that could be lied about because essentially the information's coming from military personnel. But the idea is that due to the Earth's rotation, which wouldn't exist if it was a flat Earth, objects deflect to the right in the northern hemisphere, and objects deflect to the left in the southern hemisphere. And this is supposedly backed up by snipers and different people like that, military personnel. Again, I can't verify this.
I heard that on both sides, though.
What do you mean?
I've heard many military personnel say they've never had to take into consideration the Coriolis effect.
Interesting.
And also the whole toilet bowl thing.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that one too.
That's been debunked many times.
Has it really? Okay,
Oh, yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
See, now these are things that these are kind of things that now debunked how. Like, have you tried it yourself? I mean, we should do that after the show.
I mean, there's plenty of videos that show it. Like people in the northern hemisphere flushing the toilet, and people in the southern. What they've determined is that it depends on the make and model of the bowl,
which would make complete sense.
and they actually have, you know, when you have a model number, it could be the same exact bowl, right? But two different model numbers or whatever. That depends on where it goes.
Interesting. Okay. See, it's Paul Simpsons. This was on The Simpsons when he called Australia or whatever it was. So I'm sure we've all seen this. It's subtle indoctrination. See?
Yeah.
Very interesting. On a side note, this is funny when you research this, how weird The Simpsons is, how they supposedly have like predicted all these different things throughout history, you know, as far as like Prince dying and all these different little things. Like there's a whole site where they talk about all these weird things that The Simpsons supposedly predicted before they happened. But I would be willing to bet that you could do this with just about anything.
Well, when look at the big craze about the Bible code back in the day. Well, not back in the day. Turn of the century.
But now, see, this actually brings us to another interesting point that I wanted to talk about. That, like, okay, let's just take Simpsons for example. This is considered what's called p-hacking, right? P-hacking. Now, what it is a way. It's a very modern thing, and it's something that a lot of scientists have spoken out about. Because we forget that scientists themselves are, you know, it's a business. I mean, they need to make money, and just like anybody else, there's pressure for them to get published and grants and all this stuff. So it's just like any other job at the end of the day. They're pressured to produce. And so what they do now, it's called p-hacking, which is they'll take information, arbitrary information. You take 50 people and you study them all for 2 weeks. You take the data and you essentially shuffle it up until you kind of randomly stumble across something you would consider statistically relevant, right? And this is how we get all these studies you see in the news where it's like, and this is what I touched on with the Lancet. This is what he talks about, is that essentially, you know, this is where you get the studies where it's like, oh, you know, on the Today Show, study says caffeine makes you live 10 years longer. And it's like, the reality is that it doesn't actually make you live 10 years longer, but within the study group that they found, they just happened to find that correlation between the 50 people they studied.
Yeah.
And the weird thing is a lot of times you look into these studies and it's like 10 people. It's like,
oh, wow.
It's ridiculous. And you find this all the time. So this goes into this same concept where this is how this thing can happen, where we can, you know, manipulate information to produce certain, results.
Yeah. Oh, coffee sales are down this quarter. Bring out the p-hack study.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's literally what happens, where people are getting paid to produce certain things. And so, but again, this could be used to either debunk this theory or prove that it's right. You see, and so the idea is that scientific data today is becoming it's hard to rely on it today based on this information.
Yeah, especially if you're, you know, a scientist for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and your one paper that got you into the field,
right,
all of a sudden may not be true, you're going to go to arm's length to protect that.
Absolutely. But going back to what were you saying about the clouds being seen behind the moon? I've never heard that one.
Oh, there's a lot of videos out there that show clouds that you can see, and stars you can see through the moon.
Interesting. I bet you they could just shrug that one off.
Have you ever looked up and seen the moon that looks kind of translucent?
I haven't.
Oh.
So it's like a green screen, essentially, or something like that.
I don't know.
That's what they would say about the shots from the solar system, too, looking down on the Earth, that it's essentially a green screen. There's even guys that have shown how, like, the images, like GPS of the Earth, have the exact same cloud formations that repeat over and over and over.
Or how about what's his name, Niles Dyson, that big scientist goofball. But he says the Earth isn't actually a sphere; it's more oblique, like a squished globe, like a pear shape, right?
Okay.
So that's the new thought, that it's actually this misshapen sphere. Yet we still have the blue marble perfect sphere shape picture.
Well, the same as with our map. The map that we use in the United States for schools right now is not correct. They've known that for a long time. It's not the one that supposedly is correct is not that much different. I mean, actually, you shouldn't say that. It's substantially different, but to the average observer, it doesn't look that much different. But we're talking like hundreds and thousands of miles in different shapes.
Yeah.
Whereas Africa's much more prominent and Greenland's much smaller.
Right.
And there's all these different things that are very different. But we just continue to use the normal one because whoever is in control at the top deems that to be more easy for people to look at. Which is just a ridiculous reason to keep something that's not true.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of reasons why that is too, and that kind of goes to the flight plan, not necessarily flight plans, but time zones and whatnot, and how big things are, and why the time is when you fly from one continent to another. And I don't know why they decided to change the shapes, or if that's how it had to fit on a 3D model. But
see, now that's an interesting way to think about it. Is that would make sense too. I mean, you shift a map even the smallest amount, and you're talking like a massive mathematical shift when it comes to travel, airfare, and any of these kind of things. So that would make sense that they'd want to keep it the same way because they don't have to redo all their calculations and all their fake information. So quote unquote.
Yeah.
Very weird.
If we got so many satellites in space, why are we still using ground towers for cell phones?
Yeah, I mean, they were talking about that with Google too. How Google is putting up those blimps supposedly for Wi-Fi, and people are like, why do we need that if we have satellites? It's, very interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, you could continue to swim through this information until your head spins and find both enough to make you believe and enough to make you think it's crazy.
Yeah.
And it's with this kind of information, it's very hard to find the truth when we're trying to deal with what we call, scientific research, but we're just a person with our computer sitting at home. So at the end of the day, we just got to keep your mind open. Don't even discount something like this. So, I mean, I'm going to go ahead and say point blank that if I had to take a guess right now, I would think that this is not true. But not true, not meaning essentially that the world is round or the world is flat or whatever, but more essentially that what we know today is incorrect. For whatever reason, we're being lied to, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the world is flat and in a dome. Right, just like we talk about with everything, the moon landings. It's not necessarily that we didn't do it, but that what we're seeing is fake. Right, so that's where I would stand with all of this at this point. That it's quite obvious that they're being misled for whatever reason, and for whatever they're hiding, I don't know. But I would like to think that the world's probably not flat. That's where I leave it. But what do you think?
I've been studying flat Earth for a couple of years now, and I'm more leaning towards a flat Earth. And the biggest reason why is, first of all, the whole water thing. Another example is, when you've got a pool of water will always find its level point, right? How can you find a level point on a ball?
Yeah.
Another thing is the...
but before that, just speaking on that point, I would think that mathematically speaking, it's got to be so minute, because if you're assuming that the world is round and that it actually is as long round as it's supposed to be, a pool, let's say, is such a small fraction that it would almost be considered flat when you really break it down mathematically. That would be my guess, but that's just, I'm not a scientist.
Well, yeah, but water always that's the physics behind water, is it always finds its level point.
Right.
That's what they tell us.
So what would be the alternative?
If
the world was round, let's say, what would a pool do then? And I honestly don't know. What do you think?
It doesn't make sense. I couldn't think of anything. I can't think of anything.
Yeah. I mean, the water, there's some interesting things on the water, too, that we didn't get into as far as, like, the Mississippi is a good example as far as the way that the river supposedly flows uphill for miles and miles, if that was the case, based on, topographical maps and everything, that supposedly the water somehow managed to flow uphill, which really wouldn't be possible. But I don't know enough about that kind of stuff to really speak on it, but that makes sense.
Also, the Nile River flows backwards every once in a while.
Is that really?
Yeah, that's
weird.
how it has a massive flood, I guess.
Huh.
But the biggest...
How would that be? That's weird.
I don't know. It's something big over
there. And again, that would
rare,
further...
It's like every 50 years or something. That
would further support the idea of flat, though, because how could it possibly flow backward or, whatever, if it wasn't flat?
I don't know.
That's interesting, yeah.
But the biggest point that I'm still stuck on is the 8 inches per mile squared factor.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, there should be no way that you can see a lighthouse from 100 miles out at sea.
Yeah,
it should be impossible.
It's the mathematics for me. That's what I was saying. Really, at the end of the day, that's the one thing that makes me scratch my head.
Yeah.
Is when it breaks down the mathematics of it. And the sad, like I just said a second ago, the sad part is that we're not scientists. We're just citizens that are speaking out because we feel that people need to hear the truth.
Yeah.
So don't take our word for anything. Go do your own research. But at the end of the day, the mathematics is what makes me kind of go, wow. If it were true, that would be why. I mean, that's how I think about it anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we can, so you end it where, you essentially you would say that you think it's real.
I'm undecided, but I'm more leaning towards that flat Earth is real.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, people, is that, I don't discount anybody. I mean, if someone thinks that they believe this, it's not any crazier than anything else that we once thought was fake or real.
Yeah.
There's so many times throughout our history we've come across things that were told were conspiracies and end up being true. Mm-hmm. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, we could go on. That's a whole show we should probably do eventually. But it's, so someone talking about flat Earth, you may be surprised to find out 20 years from now that they turn out to be right.
Yeah.
So don't discount them just yet.
Well, like for a good example, what is a good conspiracy that's been in the past that if you thought about it, you were absolutely crazy, but then it became true? And everybody believed it.
The big ones for me, and there's a lot of, I think, more prominent ones, but the ones for me that are the best to talk about are like the politically charged ones. Let's say like Monsanto or something like that, like the idea of GMOs, and honestly, in my opinion, something like let's say Roundup, for instance, or glyphosate. They have talked about how glyphosate it's a dangerous chemical causing cancer forever, and you guys are crazy, you're conspiracy theorists, you just hate Monsanto, blah blah blah. And then all of a sudden, World Health Organization releases their information saying that it's a probable carcinogenic.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, and then it's a small one, but look, you can't just disregard that and say, well, they were crazy, and they were right all along, but it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like these are things that people spoke out about. People engaged in massive campaigns to show that they were, crazy conspiracy theorists, and they turned out to be right.
Yeah.
So that in itself, just with many things like that. Monsanto's a big one too, but like GMOs or even vaccines. That's one that I think is one of those major topics that has been shown in multiple studies. I mean, the FDA even released information that showed that autism was a possible side effect of the MMR vaccine. Mm-hmm. It's just, it goes on and on. CDC whistleblower, and the fact that people still continue to just blanket statement the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, what's big about it too is, when we first started getting vaccines in the early 1900s, right? 20s, 30s, whatever. Mm-hmm. You weren't forced to do it. Right. But now, all of a sudden, we're forced to take all these vaccines just to have our kids go to school now.
Yep.
There's something wrong with that picture.
It is. I mean, whether you believe all the stuff that, as far as the Autism Association or the negative side effects or, anything, there's enough information out there that should make it at least worthy of further investigation. Mm-hmm. And that's not happening. Like, they're just completely disregarding the fact that it should be. I mean, that in itself is the biggest red flag there is.
Yeah.
It wouldn't make any sense, especially when we're dealing with something that is to the health of our children. I mean, it's just crazy. But anyway, the point is that don't discount anything out there. Everything has to be possible or nothing is possible at the end of the day, guys.
Yeah, no doubt.
So let's move on to some current events here. There's been some interesting things in the news, as always. But to start it off, kind of finishing that last conversation, there currently are now 2 more MMR vaccine whistleblowers.
Nice.
And they are suing.
Good.
Right? And so it's, again, I promise you this will just get swept away. Like it doesn't matter. Like it's all fake because they've already, quote unquote, proven that it doesn't count or it doesn't happen. Right? But 2 more people are now speaking out about the dangers. Essentially, they're speaking out about the fact that it's been manipulated by the company itself and that they are, hiding information, and it's Merck and Company. They create vaccines, and that these people supposedly worked for them. They were scientists for Merck, and now they're speaking out about how they fraudulently misled the government and omitted and concealed information.
Wasn't there one of the speakers that we went to that event at the Capitol? Didn't she work for Merck?
Exactly. Yeah. And
okay.
She's actually been on other documentaries I've seen. And she talks about exactly that. I forget the name of the drug, but there was a drug for a heart condition that they knew, and this has been proven, by the way. The court case settled everything. That Merck knew that the pill actually caused more heart attacks.
Yeah.
But they used it anyway, right? They go down the line, they find out that is the case, they pull the drug, and now it's off the market.
My first involvement with the pharmaceutical industry was as a pharmaceutical sales rep for Merck back when Vioxx was on the market. And when I used to rep Vioxx for Merck, and when it came out that Merck had falsified safety data, and Vioxx actually had twice the increase in heart attacks and strokes, people taking it, it really made me realize that there was a lot of corruption behind the scenes, and that just because something is on the market, a drug is on the market, doesn't mean it's safe.
So the point is that they knew, and that was proven, so that's why they settled, and these people want all this money. But it happens. These people are out to make a profit, and that is it. One of the great things they talk about in the Vax documentary is that there was a drug that got released in the United States that they found caused meningitis. I believe it was meningitis. I don't want to misspeak here, but it caused a negative side effect, like a very serious one, and so they pulled it, right? Then they changed the name, resold it to the UK.
Oh, wow.
Years go by, and so we've already pulled it for ourselves. So this company, knowing that we pulled it, knowing that it causes damage, sent it to the UK. Same thing happens down the line. Oh, yep, it causes negative things. They pull it, and then it gets sent to Brazil. It goes on in Brazil for another 5 years, and it's a joke. The point is that they knew, and it's been documented, that they clearly were aware of the side effects, and they did it anyway. It's just, this kind of thing happens. It's not that far-fetched. It's a great article on The Last American Vagabond right now. It's actually written by John Rappaport. And if you haven't heard of him, he's wildly intelligent and very well written, and you should check him out. It's simply just called 2 More MMR Vaccine Whistleblowers. They're suing. And I highly recommend you check it out. This is a topic that needs to be reopened. It can't be swept under the rug.
Yeah.
In my opinion, this is one of the most polarized and important discussions in politics right now, and it's barely even being touched.
Mm-hmm.
It is crazy. Now, kind of touching on the same idea about statistics being manipulated and things like that. Well, first off, there was a study that got released by AAA that showed that essentially there was no scientific basis that THC in your blood impairs driving. Hooray! That's fantastic, right? So everyone cheers because it's like it's showing that essentially you're not being. It's just the major point is that it's not even close to the same as drinking and driving.
No.
So there's really no way to test for it. And so it went all around all the cannabis sites, and it's a big deal, right? Because it's really showing you that it's not as dangerous as it's supposed to be.
There was this show. It was in the early 2000s. It was some kind of, I don't know, goofy game show, right? Where they had to be intoxicated for certain events. I think you had to be drunk and build a cabinet, right?
Oh, I think I've seen that, actually.
And you had to be high to drive a obstacle course. Well, I mean, they did it both ways, build the cabinet or whatever when you're high or you're drunk and you're sober. So you do it 3 ways, and they're doing this testing, and only the high people did everything right. And it obviously took a lot longer. Like they did the obstacle course in literally tens of minutes versus a 4-minute course.
Interesting.
But nothing happened. They didn't hit a cone. Nothing. So
I mean, yeah, anybody out there that is a regular smoker, they're cannabis smoker, they could have told you this.
Oh yeah.
I mean, honestly, I don't like to drive under any influence for the most part, just because I just responsible wise I don't like to. But I've known for a long time that driving under the influence of cannabis has never impaired my driving. Mm-hmm. But just nonetheless, on the safe side, I don't recommend anyone do it. Just why not? Why cause a possible risk yourself? But it says it right here on their study that it does not impair driving, which is interesting. And moving on to the next story, which is a perfect association with this one.
I don't know. I think, honestly, I would change that to not say does not impair. Because, even if you do things in a slower reaction, you're still impaired, aren't you? Exactly.
That's why I would agree with that, that it's, that it's safe. I think what they were getting into with that study is more so that it's, it does, I think it impairs your thought process, but essentially when it comes to specifically driving, that it doesn't seem to impair their driving. Which, it's, again, I think I can agree with.
Yeah.
Now, the next one, the title is CBS News Caught Blatantly Distorting Cannabis Study. It says legal pot doubles fatal car crashes.
Oh, wow.
Now, no one out there, especially you guys listening to the show right now, believe that the mainstream media tells you the truth. It's just become like a joke. It's become a joke amongst the United States, but it's become a worldwide joke that our media is just ridiculous.
I wouldn't believe anything. Columbia Broadcasting System. Where do you get Columbia from? District of Columbia? Just look up what Columbia stands for in these guys' eyes, and you'll find out why.
Right, exactly. But the funny thing is that, we know that they lie. It's not a secret. But the fact that they took this study that clearly shows one thing. I mean, it's straight from the AAA information. Like they titled it the way they titled it, and then they take this information and they manipulate it, just like we were talking about, the whole p-hacking scenario. You're taking that information and they kind of mixed it around until it showed you that essentially there's a certain way that you can exclude certain data within this, and then it makes it seem as if they doubled car crashes.
Yeah.
The point is they're not including the ones where, or they are including the ones where people were also drunk. Mm-hmm. But they don't
Drunk
say it.
and high.
Exactly.
Or under some other influence.
And they do say on there that is probably the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
Drinking and smoking is terrible for it. You're wildly impaired.
Yeah.
But so they take that and they omit that fact and they tell you as if cannabis is dangerous, and it's just a joke. So I mean, it's whenever you're watching mainstream news today, people, I highly recommend that you either don't, exactly, either completely don't watch it or take it with a very large grain of salt. I mean, it's like this one. It's just completely the opposite of what it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see how they can get away with that, but so be it. Okay, last one for the day. This one's pretty funny to me. Hacker arrested and jailed after exposing flaws in election website. So this gentleman, who actually works for a business that specializes in finding these kind of things, funny enough, found a inconsistency in this election website that made it pretty clear that it was possible for manipulation. Uh-huh. So he does his due diligence and contacts them and shows them that it's there, and they arrest him for showing them that their site was fake or had a potential for manipulation. Not only did they arrest him, they didn't do anything about the website. So the website's still exactly the same. And so now this guy,
they put the back door there.
Exactly. I mean, that's our assumption, obviously, but I mean, it's just kind of a joke because this guy gets arrested for helping them. Yeah. That's what he does. And so what they're simultaneously doing is showing the person reading this that, one, hackers are bad, that you hack and work independently, you're going to get arrested, and then two, that don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. It's like we're rigging the election and we don't want you to see it. It's pretty crazy to me.
Weren't you going to talk about that other non-lethal drug?
Oh, that's correct. Yeah, I do have that one right here.
We were talking about it before the show. Kratom.
I've heard kratom and kratom.
Kratom sounds more scientifically correct.
It does, right? So let's go with
kratom.
Now, this is an interesting one because, what we're seeing when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry is it's this all-encompassing reach in the medical field. That they almost have complete control now over what we take and what we're prescribed and medical action. I mean, everything. We just touched on medical kidnapping, which ties in with that exact same topic. If you don't know what that is, check out our last week's show. We'd really dive into child protective services and medical kidnapping, which ties in with this exact thing, basically opting out of what they recommend and trying to find some kind of a natural alternative. Mm-hmm. Now, what's happening is there's a substance called kratom, which is a natural substance. It's a root, either extract or just kind of ground up. You can literally just take the leaves off the tree and put them in your lip like tobacco. And it provides a mild sedative effect. They compare it to a very, very mild opiate, right? But there's no opiates in it. It's all natural alkaloids that are in the plant that naturally occurring give you these effects. And it is being heralded as just like an absolute miracle drug. It has great effects for anxiety, depression, insomnia, on and on and on. Mm-hmm. Now, what would this seem like to Big Pharma? Obvious competition, right? Exactly. So what's happening now is in Alabama, which is where it's starting. As far as I understand it, it's already in the books for a lot of other states to begin this legislation. They've now deemed it a Schedule I substance, just like cannabis.
And they haven't done any studies on it whatsoever.
Yeah, well, I mean, exactly. I mean, there are some studies out there, but it's just like it is with cannabis, where it's all... it's very few and far between at this point. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I think cannabis has been done to death. They just don't like to recognize any of them. Mm-hmm. But so kratom is now a Schedule I substance in Alabama. And this is a blatant effort to eradicate any natural alternative that you can go to outside of their pharmaceutical drugs. And it's crazy. I mean, the one thing that I like to think about is you take into comparison the idea of alcohol and tobacco. This is the country's go-to non-drugs, quote, that essentially are worse than every other drug out there for the most part. Alcohol, hands down. I mean, there's been studies over and over that show that alcohol is hands down the worst thing you can put in your body over methamphetamines, over heroin, over anything. A scientist named David Nutt, actually from the UK, was the one that kind of championed this study, and he lost his job for it, believe it or not, just like the guys at Vaxxed. It's been verified since then, but he got ostracized from the community.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like we've said before, try to throw a party today and not have alcohol for your guests. See what happens. People lose their minds. It's like, how can you have a party without alcohol?
Not only that, but no one's ever going to talk to you again.
Exactly.
You ever go to a wedding without alcohol?
That's exactly. It's been ingrained into our society to the point to where it is just it's what we need to accompany any kind of thing we associate with entertainment. So it's to find out that it's this terrible thing.
Yeah.
It just shocks the system. It's like trying to say we don't need dairy or red meat's bad for you, which they are, and that you're gonna get shot down by these industries because they have so much money involved in politics.
Ain't no twerking at a club without the hot damn.
Hot damn. No, thank you. But so essentially what they're doing now is they've made it a Schedule I substance, and now it's against the law. And you're seeing this happen all over the place. And this dates back all the way, we've touched on as well, to the beginning of kind of the deceit of Western medicine in this country, where they made it become pharmaceutical based, which all ties back to oil, believe it or not. A lot of these pharmaceutical drugs are created from oil, essentially, and just about everything else we use. So it's very interesting when you tie that with the Rockefellers and that whole beginning story.
Yeah.
But it's
standard oil. It's
something that I recommend that anybody, people need to just kind of speak out about this and start doing something about it. If you go to the Last American Vagabond site, at the bottom of the article, there's a place where you can find further research and kind of speak out about it. Mm-hmm. But if we continue to allow them to label all these things illegal, it's rights that you are losing. Everybody should have the right to do with whatever they want with their own body. And to say that I can't use some natural extract that I find to be better, it's just wild for me. The story actually I based it on a person that's a friend of mine, that she wants her name to be left out of it. So I called her Sarah in the article. But she's a teacher, and she literally has switched over to kratom because she could function with it, as opposed to the multiple different medications she was on for anxiety, different things that basically stole her creativity. She felt like she couldn't really embrace her responsibilities of the day because she'd have this fog about her, and she couldn't survive without them. So when she found kratom and she was able to take it and get rid of all of her medications, it was a godsend for her, right? And now she's finding out that it's against the law, and she's a teacher. She had to get rid of it. Yeah. And now she's freaking out and she's struggling. So she reached out to me and said, Ryan, help me. We need to do something about this. And, people need to start speaking out. I mean, we're going to see this happen with a lot of things. But, once we let them control our inner abilities, choices with everything, that's what we're seeing. That it's one more step in the wrong direction.
It shouldn't be up to you or I to judge her for wanting to take care of her own body. She knows it better than anybody else, better than any fucking doctor that's got 4 PhDs in asshole anatomy. But it doesn't matter. It's if you know your body and you know it works and it's working, praise you,
right? And who's to say otherwise?
Yeah,
it's the best thing about it is that it's extremely, very, very low in addiction. It's relative to cannabis. That very, very, very mild, if any, withdrawal side effects when you stop. It's very, very, very small occurrence of addiction, and it's no more addictive than anything, cannabis or anything like that. And then you take the things like we talked about, tobacco, alcohol specifically, that kill more people every year than all of these combined. Mm-hmm. And then you wonder how they can say that this one is okay on a daily basis, and this one thing that is very healthy for you and non-addictive and all this is now the worst thing you can have. If you get caught with kratom in Alabama, it is the same as if getting caught with heroin.
That's ridiculous.
Think about that for a second. It's wild.
That is insane. I got a topic for you.
Okay,
I got a current event. So, like, this whole thing, the Matrix, you could call it, right? Like this whole going down the rabbit hole, and, decoding the Matrix. It's all over there. Everybody refers to this awakening as breaking out of the Matrix type of thing.
Right.
Well, now there's this cat out there, this Matrix fan, who swears the Matrix is real and has been stalking Keanu Reeves. Did you find that funny? He had to get a restraining order against a person that they don't have a name for or identity.
Interesting.
Yeah, I just thought that was kind of funny.
That is pretty funny.
Bring that up.
So Keanu Reeves had to personally take a restraining order against him?
Yeah, but they don't know who it is.
How is that possible?
If I know.
This is weird. So restraining order against nobody, right?
Yeah, anybody that says Matrix is real.
Interesting. Blanket statement.
Yep. Go figure.
All right. Conspiracy freestyle. Let's see what we got.
Hopefully you took out the last week's.
I did. I see them right there. This.
All right.
Okay. Let's see what we got here today.
Flat Earth.
You know what? I was just going to say the same thing. Okay. It says birth certificate is a traded security.
Oh.
And then maybe they meant commodity. Is that what that's supposed to mean?
It's the same thing. Traded security. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Commodity.
Now that actually kind of ties in with
Straw man.
well, that or the Act of 1871 or a
That
couple of the
too.
different things we've talked about. So that's interesting. You know, that's one thing that you know you might be more well versed than I am on that one. So what do you got on it?
Well, if you think of a birth certificate, oh man, you can go so far in this one. So a birth certificate is basically a warehouse receipt of goods being delivered.
Okay.
It's got all the same information if you look at a doc birth certificate, which is the same thing as our live birth certificate, which is kind of funny because if you were to go get a copy of your birth certificate, it will no longer be a live birth certificate like what was filled out in the hospital. It becomes a birth certificate, not a live birth certificate.
Interesting.
And apparently, I've not been able to visually verify this, obviously, but if you look on the back or in the lower right corner of your birth certificate, it'll have what essentially is your trading number, your stock number. And you can actually take that down to an investor or whatever, say, hey, look up this stock and tell me what it's worth.
Really?
So that's one thing about it. And apparently, it varies. I've heard each person, depending on their age, is worth anywhere from $3 million up to $10 billion.
Actually, I've seen those the financial statistics. But so have you verified this with anybody? Do you know someone that's actually walked down and done that?
Not me personally, not like a friend or anything, but
Interesting.
I have I just got a copy of my birth certificate, so I'm gonna go do it.
It just seems we'll have to touch back on that and find out if what your experience actually is. Because I mean, it's again any of this stuff. I would be like, why not? It seems just as plausible as anything else. But it would seem weird that somebody would be able to walk down and do that. It would be that simple. You know what I mean? Like that would throw a wrench in their system for sure when you find out that you're just a commodity. You know?
Well, definitely. But what are you gonna do about it?
Yeah, exactly.
You can't.
What can you do?
Can't actually get you. If you try, you cannot get your original copy.
Huh.
It's out there, and some people there are videos out there that show the stamps of the different banks of different countries that it's gone through.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's but it really kind of ties back in like we talked about with the like once we became a corporation. Man, we essentially would be commodities.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what, by default, really.
Slave labor.
Yeah. And, it does make sense. I mean, if you look at the way that the world functions today, I mean, it's, obviously there's there's kind of, whatever you want to call it, the world leaders, UN, whatever, there's like this elite that essentially dictate everything, and we're just existing.
Yeah.
We're just
Pretty much.
peons in the system where we're just kind of adhering to whatever they decide.
Yeah.
It just kind of seems, what would we be closer to than, other than cattle,
I was just going to say cattle,
Yeah.
we're sitting there, we're grazing for them, and then eventually we're just going to get slaughtered.
Right? Get all nice and plump for them.
Just as long as they don't try to milk me.
Oh, that's gross. Speaking of milk, there's been all those, there's been a lot of information coming out that shows that it's like the worst thing for you.
Oh, yeah.
But we've known that, yeah.
It's so far out of human evolution to drink that past like several months of your age, your birth.
It's pretty crazy. I put one article we put up on that on Reddit, and it's just amazing to see. And it was on a conspiracy Reddit, and on a conspiracy subreddit, and it's crazy to see even on that how people can just recoil from this. Like you're out of your mind. How can you?
Yeah.
Milk is healthy. Everybody knows that, and it's just like. This isn't even like a conspiracy. This is like straight from a dietitian. It's like people are just
they're so inundated
manipulated.
with the doctors and dietitians and pediatricians are so inundated with so much shit out there. They don't know their ass from their asshole.
Yeah, I mean, and like you just said, it's an evolutionary. It's you really break it down from an evolutionary standpoint. We are not supposed to. I mean, look at it like no other mammal continues to drink milk after their weaning process.
Right.
And no other animal outside of humans drink another mammal's milk. So it's just really not natural in a worldly sense, but it's like we said, on an evolutionary standpoint, it seems like it would definitely be something that should not happen, and you like on the enzymes, we're not supposed to be able to break them down. You look at like a Japanese culture, for instance, they just simply don't consume dairy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's it's pretty
Well,
weird.
look how many people nowadays have
Lactose intolerance.
lactose intolerance.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, and then the obvious question would be, why is it still being pushed? And it's because, like we said earlier, meat.
Because lactose intolerant products cost way more.
Well, I mean, more that the dairy industry has billions of dollars invested in politics and politicians and bribery and, sorry, not bribery, donations.
Oh, yeah, donations. right. Got to keep it PC.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but I mean, it's the birth certificate thing really does kind of lay it all out there, that everything like this is, we're all just being manipulated to go through our days, buy things, consume, drink your milk, and eat your red meat, so we can one day be sold.
I mean, just take a small snippet, cliff note of your life, of any general life, like especially with the American dream involved, right? Mm-hmm. You're born, you get a few years of being at home with your mother and father, and then you go off to school until college in hopes to get a good job or a career, in hopes to buy a house with a family and have a couple cars or whatever, in hopes to retire and have some money saved. That's a joke.
Yeah.
Retirement age is getting pushed back every 3-4 years.
If there's such a thing.
If there's such a... I know we won't have a retirement when we get to that age. There's no fucking way. So, I mean, your whole life you're spending paying off essentially debt.
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
disgusting.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to leave you with that, ladies and gentlemen. I would say to all you out there listening that if there was something we missed today on Flat Earth Theory, or something that you feel that I'm just wrong about, or you want to call in and say, Ryan, you know what you're talking about, I want to prove to you that this is right, call in, let us know. We'd love to hear from you guys to get your perspective on anything we talk about. But
yeah, I would sit on the flat Earth for a while, though. Sleep on it for a few years. That's probably the biggest one to digest, I think, right now.
Oh yeah, it's just so. I mean, like we said, it's so easy. Pretty much everything you can stumble across both proves and disproves it simultaneously. It's like all the, if you can discredit all them because it can be fake, so could everything else.
Yeah.
So it's really hard. But like I said, at the end of the day, I would settle on the fact that the world is round, except everything we know about it's probably fake for whatever reason. We just don't know why.
Yeah.
Flat Earth theory just happens to be what becomes the explanation for that lying. That would be my guess. But call in, guys. Let us know. Enlighten us.
916-633-1393.
Anytime between 3 and 4 every Sunday.
Make sure you tweet.
There you go. Go ahead.
Third Eye at Third Eye Radio. And I forgot to mention this before, but apparently it matters. Our Twitter handle is Decantinated. So for all of you who don't know linguistics, that's at capital T HIRD, capital EYE, capital RADIO.
Oh, nice. Okay. And ours is capital TLA Vagabond on Twitter. So as always, guys, do your own research. Make sure you follow the change. Be the change.
Peace.
I reduce regiments and put troops in the sand. We get scammed into war, shoot each other with slugs. Paint the White House red using government blood. Love it when the beast suffers, hope the pain is a lot. Love it when the streets covered with the brains of a cop. Not peaceful, I go beast mode to delete souls. Each flow I speak's known to defeat foes. See the show, you can cite the microphone terrorists. Murdering crowds like how ISIS in Paris is.